Hello, I'm Mark Payne. Welcome to History Alive. History Alive is a program of the West Virginia Humanities Council that brings historical figures to life through portrayals by presenters who have conducted thorough research into their character. These presentations are both entertaining and educational. The Humanities Council makes these characters available to nonprofit organizations across West Virginia such as schools, libraries, historical societies, and a wide range of civic groups. The presentation fee is paid by the council, and we ask only that their travel costs be covered by the host group. History Alive is designed as an interactive experience between the character and the audience. We encourage your organization or school to host a presentation and bring a figure from history for a visit with your audience or students. Having someone like Booker T. Washington, Mad Ann Bailey, or Babe Ruth come to speak to your group can breathe life into these historical figures and make them more real. Nothing compares to the live, in-person visit. Each presentation consists of 3 parts: a monologue, a question-answer session with the character, and then the presenter breaks character to answer questions about how he or she conducted their research. The presenters on our History Live roster have researched a variety of sources such as diaries, journals, letters, official documents, autobiographies, and the research of other scholars in developing their character. A History Live presentation is not a play. It's an audience participation event that relies on interaction between the audience and the character. Being able to ask your own questions of these important figures from the past is a unique experience. It's difficult to reproduce the feel of an actual History Live presentation here in the studio. Without an audience to ask questions, we'll change the format a bit and have our guests sit with me for a few questions after the monologue. But we hope to give a sample of how a History Live presentation can add to the offerings at your school or organization. There will be information on the screen at the end of this program for how to contact the Humanities Council about bringing a History Live character to your community. At this time, I would like to welcome today's guest from history. We are pleased to have with us in the studio the Swedish Nightingale, Jenny Lind.
Phineas Taylor Barnum, P.T. Barnum. Who was this man? You may have heard of him, but I had never heard of him until this representative came to me and asked me to do a concert tour in the United States of America. Well, I asked about him, and people said, yeah, he is a respectable man, but they also called him a humbug. Do you know what that means? I did not. It means someone who stretches the truth. So, before I accepted his proposal, I made sure that he had put all the money that he promised me for the entire tour in the bank in London, $186,500 plus expenses. I found out that Mr. Barnum had never even heard me sing. He did not know very much about me. Mr. Barnum did not know that when I was a young girl, I was 3 years old. My grandmother heard me play the piano. I had heard the buglers marching by our window, and I went to the piano and I played it. She knew then that I had talent. Mr. Barnum did not know that I was the youngest child ever to be accepted into the Royal Theatre School in Sweden. You see, I had been in foster care, and I was staying at the widow's home. My grandmother also was staying there. And I was singing to a cat. Then the maid of one of the dancers from the Royal Theatre School in Sweden heard me sing. Mademoiselle Lundberg was her name, and she heard me too. And she made that I got this audition in the school. So it wasn't very long that I started appearing in the plays and the operas there at the school. Mr. Barnum did not know that on March 7th, 1838, my life changed, because that was when I had my first starring role in the opera at the age of 17. I woke up one creature that morning, and I went to bed a different creature. I had found my power. I knew that my power came from God, that He gave me disability, and He wanted me to use it for other people the rest of my life. I knew what my mission was in life. Mr. Barnum probably did not know either that my dear friend, my brother, Hans Christian Andersen, wrote several stories about me because, you see, after I starred in that opera, they started calling me the Swedish Nightingale in the newspapers. So he wrote a story called The Emperor's Nightingale. He wrote another story called The Ugly Duckling. That was about me. You may have heard the story. It talks about how this young little duck is very ugly. And then when it grows up, it becomes this beautiful swan. Well, people say that I became transformed when I went on the stage because I am not a pretty woman. I am quite plain. But when I become that character, every bit of my being is brought into it and I am transformed. And they say I am beautiful. That is why when Mr. Barnum came to me, I was totally exhausted. I had been in 677 performances in dirty operas in 11 years. Then you put so much of your life, so much of your being into your characters. It drains you, and I was ready for a change. Mr. Barnum knew that I was a deeply religious woman, but he did not know that my life in the theater had so consumed me that it made me think less of this and not at all of the beautiful world that he had created. When I think back, I think, what else could I do? I had to make a change because I loved nature and I loved my God, and I wanted them to be part of my life. My dear friend Felix Mendelssohn supported me in this as well. Mr. Barnum knew that I had many admirers, including Queen Victoria. He knew that I could draw a crowd, and I believe he also thought I could earn him a lot of money. And so it began. We crossed the Atlantic on a steamship and we arrived in New York City. I could not believe my eyes. There were over 30,000 people waiting for me. And they were shouting, "We want Jenny! We want Jenny!" Some of them fell into the water. Some of them were crushed in a stampede. Oh, there had been crowds, wild crowds in England, but nothing compared to this. So, Mr. Barnum and I, we set out on this adventure. The very first concert I had was there in New York City, at the lower end of Manhattan in Castle Garden, on September 11th, 1850. Mr. Barnum had the idea to auction off the first pair of tickets. This is a practice that he continued throughout my tour in the United States. The very first pair sold for $225. I could not believe it. But then we went to Providence, Rhode Island. A gentleman paid $650 for his pair of tickets. What a fool he was! And then he didn't even attend a concert. Now, when we were in Wheeling, Virginia, now West Virginia, there was a tailor who bought tickets for $250. He wanted to make sure everybody noticed him, that he would draw attention. So he had a gold-gilded eagle that he placed on his shoulders, and the wings came out over his head. What a spectacle he made. I wonder if anybody bought clothes from him because of that. But Lindomania was sleeping the country. Everywhere I went, people were coming to me and they were naming all sorts of things after me. They called it Lynn fever. They named bridges and boats and furniture and noodles, and even in Havana, they named cigars after me. Everywhere we went, the people, they came. But when we arrived in New Orleans, there was such a large crowd that I became frightened. And I did not know what to do. So Mr. Barnum, he had his daughter Caroline put a veil over her head, and he led her down the gangplank. Well, everybody thought it was me, so of course the crowd dispersed, and I was able to leave the ship without any trouble. Well, when we got to Cincinnati, the newspaper had already reported what had happened in New Orleans, so we knew we could not do that trick again. This time, Mr. Barnum said, "You put the veil over your face." So I did. Took his arm, and he led me down the gangplank, and as we were going, his assistant, Mr. Legrand, said, "Oh, Mr. Barnum, you can't fool it over on us passing off your daughter as Jenny Lind." And the crowd thought that was funny. Some of them yelled out, "Oh, you may have fooled those folks in New Orleans, but you can't come it over on the Buckeyes." The joke was on them, because then they saw later, when Caroline was there, they knew that they had been fooled, just like the people in New Orleans. One of the greatest thrills of my life was when I sang in Washington. President Fillmore was in the audience, along with Henry Clay, Daniel Webster, and the songwriter John Howard Payne. Mr. Webster started singing along with me in the middle of my concert, and he stood up in the aisle and he bowed to me. I have never seen that before. Then I went to Mr. Payne, and I sang to him his song, "Home, Sweet Home," right in front of him. "Be it ever so humble, there's no place like home." Mr. Payne, not I, received a standing ovation. I am told it was one of the most happy moments of his life. There were many happy times, many times that I sang that song in my concert after that. I sang songs from the operas, from the oratorios, Swedish folk songs, and popular songs. One of the new composers of the day was a young American named Stephen Foster, and I began singing his songs, and he became popular because of it. One of my favorite songs to sing was from the opera Handel's Messiah. It is, "I know that my Redeemer liveth." I sang the opera songs many times for the first time in people's lives had they heard these beautiful songs. Because you see, I sang it everywhere I went, for the poor, for the rich, for the young, and for the old. I sometimes sang for people who could not afford to come to my shows, who helped me along the way. For 21 months, I continued traveling throughout the United States, and oh, what times I had. I remembered when I went to the New York Institute for the Blind. The children came to me, and they put their fingers on my face so that they could see me. I said to one little girl, "I wish that I could make for you to see." And she said to me, "But I will see in heaven, and you'll be there." Oh, it touched my heart so. Then there were the college students. Oh, then I was in Toronto and again in Providence. They unhitched the horses from my carriage and they carried me throughout the streets of the city singing, just like they had done in Hamburg, Germany. Oh, I remember one of those Hamburg students. He later joined me on my American tour and became my accompanist. And then he became my husband, Otto, my beloved and talented Otto. And I made many new friends too. One of those was Harriet Beecher Stowe. Then we were in Boston. Mr. Howard had been sent by her to purchase tickets for my concert there. When he arrived, he found out that the concert was sold out. Well, he hunted down and found my Otto, who, when he found out who the tickets were for, He came to me immediately, and of course, I gave her some of the best seats in the house. Mrs. Stowe then sent me a letter of thank you and a copy of her book, Uncle Tom's Cabin. I sent her a reply and I said, I feel great things for Uncle Tom's Cabins and the changes that will happen by and by. And I am so glad that now my words have come true and your country no longer has the slavery. Yeah, I had many happy memories here. I went back after I left. My final performance was in May of 1852 in the city where I began, in New York City. One of the things I took back with me to my country was a quilt given to me by the school children of America, and I wish to be buried with that quilt. I have been asked to return to the United States. Some of them especially warm appeals. One of them came from the United Committee, Ladies Committee of the United Sanitation Commission. They wanted me to do a series of benevolent concerts for the relief of the wounded soldiers and their families. Here's what their letter said. The memories of your voice are still fresh in the hearts of Americans. Still more precious to me is the recollection that that voice was always exerted for benevolent and humane objects. The welcome that would await you is such as could be given to Jenny Lynn, whose harmonious notes have lingered in our ears, not only because they were delicious, but because they were the outpouring of a pure and gentle heart. I will always cherish these birds. No, Mr. Barnum did not know me, and I did not know him either. What began as a business relationship turned into a true friendship. I began to admire him very greatly, and he me. I am so grateful to him for giving me this opportunity of coming to the United States, where I could share my gift of song with them, my good fortunes, and my love for my God. Mr. P.T. Barnum, God bless you.
I'm here with Jenny Lind, the Swedish Nightingale, and Mrs. Lynn Goldschmidt, I'd like to thank you for taking time out of your schedule to join us today on History Live.
You're very welcome.
Just remind me again, you first arrived to tour the United States and performing in what year?
It was in 1850 in September. Then I arrived in New York City.
Okay, and how long did you remain on tour? How long were you in the United States?
I was here for 21 months. I had my final concert again in New York in May of 1852.
I'd like to ask, I'm curious, what's one of your lasting memories of traveling the United States and performing?
Well, the greatest memory, of course, was my beloved Otto, that I became in love with him and that we were married here. There were many good times there for so many people and so many concerts, but one that particularly sticks out in my mind as not being very pleasant was one that I had in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. The building that we performed in could not hold everybody who wanted to attend the concert, and so there was quite a crowd outside, and they were yelling and they were screaming and they were throwing things at the building. It got so bad that we could not hear the orchestra, they could not hear me singing in the audience, and we had to stop the performance. Well, after a while, Mr. Barnum left with most of his people, but I was too afraid to leave for my safety, so I stayed in the place where he went and was able to hire a dray. This was after several hours, and the crowd still had not dispersed. And they took the dray around behind the building, and we went out through the basement, and they took some of the boards off the fence so that I could get through the fence to get to the dray to get back to my hotel. And I said I did not ever want to perform in Pittsburgh again.
Ah, well, I could understand that. So did you find that American audiences were different from your European audiences?
Yeah, in Europe it was mainly the rich, the wealthy people who came to hear me at the opera. But in the United States, I was able to sing not only opera songs, but other songs to people of all stages and all walks of life.
Do you have any idea of how many concerts you performed in the United States? Or
well, under Mr. Barnum, I performed 90, and then I did approximately 35 to 40 on my own. So we went everywhere in the United States, from Philadelphia to Memphis, Tennessee, to New Orleans, to Cincinnati, to Pittsburgh, and even went to Toronto and Montreal and Havana while I was on my United States tour.
So how did you find travel? How was traveling from place to place for you?
Well, the steamship had just been invented. It was very new for us crossing the Atlantic on that. That might have been one reason that there were so many people who showed up. But we also traveled on the trains, and at that time, trains did not always go from one city to another city. You had to go a short distance and get off it and get on a wagon or a stagecoach to go to the next city to get on that. So it took quite a while to travel around to get to different places.
Now, you performed in Wheeling, which is here in what is now West Virginia.
Yeah.
Do you have any memory of that concert, or do you know where it was that you performed in Wheeling?
It was the 4th Street ME Church, and they had me performing there. As I told you, the one gentleman, the tailor who bought it, purchased his ticket for $250. Most of the tickets, though, sold for $10 to $5. The standing room only, there was quite a crowd there.
Now, you are known to be a philanthropic giver and supporter of many good causes.
Yeah.
Are there any in particular that you'd like to share with us, or how did you get into doing that?
Well, I guess my whole life, any money that I made, I gave to other people, starting with my mother and my father and my family to take care of them. But then there were other people who needed money, and I just gave it to them because I had it and they didn't. As I started working more and gaining money, I established scholarship funds for Swedish students. And then I also gave a lot to the orphanages, to firemen, to hospitals, and then the Institute for the Blind, which you know of. I also gave to anti-slavery causes, such as to Harriet Beecher Stowe.
At this time, I would like to welcome to the program the presenter of Jenny Lind. This is actually Joanne Peterson of Kingwood, West Virginia.
Yes.
Joanne, thanks for being here with us today.
Well, you're welcome. I'm glad to be here. Thank you.
Jenny Lind is one of the new characters on our History Live roster. We're very pleased that you're with us and on the roster. So I'll ask you what I ask all of the guests on this program, which is, what was it about Jenny Lind, or your character that you do, that interested you to the point of wanting to do the research?
Well, a number of years ago, I performed in the musical Barnum the Musical, and I played the character Jenny Lind. And I did just a little tiny bit of research and found out the way she was portrayed in that play was not at all the way Jenny was in real life. She was immodest, she was a flirt, she was beautiful, and Jenny in real life was just the opposite. She was deeply religious, she was very modest, and she was not very self-assured. She also it was just totally different than what it was. So that intrigued me, and the more I found out about her, the more I was interested in her. Her real name is actually Johanna, Johanna, which is same form as my name, Joanne. She was born October 6th. I was born October 3rd. She had 2 boys and a girl. I had 2 boys and a girl. So there were just a lot of things that connected me with her. And then when I was in the 3rd grade, I was singing, and my teacher said, "Oh, you have the voice of a nightingale."
Yeah.
So then when I found out Jenny was called the Swedish nightingale, like I said, I just had a real connection with her.
Well, I'd say that the stars were lining up there for
Yes,
you with Jenny.
and her faith and my faith were both very deep as
So
well.
what some of the sources? How did you go about your research? Any
Well,
general or specific
I
sources?
bought a lot of books. One of them was a biography that was done by Rockstro, and her husband Otto Goldschmidt supplied much of the materials for that. Her daughter Jenny Maud also wrote a biography about her mother. P.T. Barnum's biography and also Hans Christian Andersen's biography were very helpful. I did a lot of online research, and that was very helpful. The New York Times had a lot of articles that they had in their archives too.
And so Jenny was really one of the very first celebrity phenomenons, was she?
She
not?
was the first celebrity phenomenon. I call her the first American Idol. People can understand that.
Yeah.
When she came to the United States, unlike a lot of the other entertainers who had been here, she was not at the beginning or the end of her career. She was at the height of her career. She was big stuff in Europe. So she came here in her heyday, and she came and brought music to the common man. The opera had not been sung to the common man before. As I told you, that was always done to the elite. So that made her very different. She also didn't come to make a lot of money for herself. She gave away over $500,000 during her lifetime. So she was not all about herself. She was not the center of her universe.
And those were $1,850.
That was $1,850, yes. Yeah, the 1800s.
She had there were so many products that were named for Jenny Lind. Was she involved in any of that, or how did that come about? Was that a?
I think she was more astounded about it than anything else, that people would put her name on all these things, like I said, from furniture to boats to bridges and beyond that. And even today, you can find Jenny Lind cribs. And then in southern West Virginia, they have houses called Jenny Lind houses. The infirmary in England is still around, named after Jenny Lind. And many people have collections. There are libraries that have, like in Chicago, there are archives of some of the memorabilia from Jenny Lind.
Well, here in about the last minute or so of the program, how did, once she left the United States, where did she go? Did she ever come back to America, and how did she spend her final days?
No, she never returned to the United States, although she had liked to. Her health just didn't permit it. She went back to Sweden, then to Dresden, Germany, and then she settled in Malvern Hills in England, which is where she died at the age of 67. She had a cerebral hemorrhage, which is a stroke, and lingered for a short while, very painful, before she passed away on November 2nd of 1887. And she is buried there in the Malvern Cemetery in Worcester, England.
Did she not, what sort of honors and recognitions did Jenny?
She was the very first woman to ever be memorialized at Westminster Abbey Poets' Corner. Her plaque is beside Handel's, and around it says, "I know that my Redeemer liveth," which was the song that she was so known by. She is also, her image is on the 50 kroner banknote in Sweden.
Well, Joanne Peterson, thank you so much for being with us, and thank you for tuning in to History Alive.